برای توی کوچه رقصیدن، برای ترسیدن به وقت بوسیدن، برای خواهرم، خواهرت، خواهرامون، برای تغییر مغزها که پوسیدن، برای شرمندگی، برای بیپولی، برای حسرت یک زندگی معمولی، برای کودک زباله‌گرد و آرزوهاش، برای این اقتصاد دستوری، برای این هوای آلوده، برای ولیعصر و درختای فرسوده، برای پیروز و احتمال انقراضش، برای سگهای بیگناه ممنوعه، برای گریه های بیوقفه، برای تصویر تکرار این لحظه، برای چهره ای که میخنده، برای دانش آموزا، برای آینده، برای این بهشت اجباری، برای نخبه های زندانی، برای کودکان افغانی، برای این همه برای غیر تکراری، برای این همه شعارهای تو خالی، برای آوار خونه های پوشالی، برای احساس آرامش، برای خورشید پس از شبای طولانی، برای قرصای اعصاب و بیخوابی، برای مرد میهن آبادی، برای دختری که آرزو داشت پسر بود، برای زن زندگی آزادی، برای آزادی، برای آزادی، برای آزادی.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Dr. Claudia Yaghoobi, Roshan Associate Professor in Persian Studies and the Director of the Center for the Middle East and Islamic Studies at UNC Chapel Hill. I'm so pleased to be here with you, with our panelists discussing the complexities and nuances of what is occurring in Iran right now, even if it is for a tragic moment, but we are all hopeful. As you know, protests broke out spontaneously across the country after images spread on social media of a 22-year-old woman named Mahsa Jina Amini, unconscious on the hospital bed where she would be declared dead on September 16, 3 days after being arrested by a morality patrol. The protests, or what's being called feminist social revolution, continue to this day as we are mid-third week. The protests are different in a few aspects from other protests or revolutions that we know of in Iran that have happened in Iran. For instance, they are leaderless and people from various socioeconomic, gender, sexual, ethno-religious backgrounds are united. This is no longer the revolution of the upper class or upper middle class educated urban community. This is a movement where all sectors of the society, from Kurdish and Baluch people to men and women, to trans and queer folks and urban and rural communities have come together. And their common demand is not simply to end the morality police or veiling laws, but to end the theocratic authoritarian regime. This is a historic moment in the history of Iran. However, it is not a moment divorced from other moments in Iran's history. So it's important to place it in its historical context of its birth and evolution. It is also crucial to understand the multi-layered nuances and avoid reductionism. This is our goal today here. Before turning to our conversation, I would like to thank UNC Persian Studies, the Center for the Middle East and Islamic Studies, the North Carolina Consortium for Middle East Studies, and the Duke University Middle East Center, my colleagues in both centers and on both campuses that have co-sponsored and made this event possible. I would also like to ask everyone to ask their questions at the end of the panel, either through raising your hand so we can call on you, or putting your question in the chat. And I will read the questions. Our featured panelists today are Dr. Fatemeh Shams and Dr. Esha Momeni. Dr. Esha Momeni holds a PhD in gender studies from the University of California, Los Angeles, where she is also a lecturer currently. She also has an MA in mass communication. Her research and teaching specializations include modern Iran and the Middle East, media and popular culture, and gender and sexuality. Since 2006, she has been active in Iranian women's rights issues by taking part in various projects. She has also worked in the fields of music, playwriting, photography, animation, and video documentary. Dr. Fatemeh Shams is a specialist in Persian literature. She earned her PhD in Oriental Studies from University of Oxford. She is the author of A Revolution in Rhyme, Poetic Co-option under the Islamic Republic, published by Oxford University Press in 2021. Her work focuses on the intersection of literature, politics, and society. Dr. Shams is interested in the evolution of poetry and patronage in the Persian literary tradition and the representation and transformation of this relationship in modern Iran. She is also an internationally acclaimed award-winning poet and has so far published 3 collections of poetry in Persian and English. So what we are going to do today is I'm going to ask questions from the panelists, both Dr. Shams and Dr. Momeni, and then at the end, we'll open the floor to the audiences for Q&A. So I'll begin with the first question, and Dr. Momeni can go first, and then Dr. Shams. Can you tell us a bit about the history of hijab, its evolution in Iran, the laws regarding veiling and unveiling, which have historically politicized it?
Thank you so much for organizing this panel, and thank you so much for inviting me to be included in this very important historical moment. I'm going to start briefly about the history of controlling female body in public spaces, and then I move to the current moment and talk about what fuels this the feminist uprising. Before I start, I want to point out that it's very important to understand the function of hijab and the concept of hijab outside of the Islamic framework and outside of the religious framework, which is very much dominant in the West and inside the country. And instead of that, understand it and discussions around it as and see it as an subcategory of biopolitical control and the politics of the body and its relationship with the state. Discussions around veil and unveiling and female body in public space in Iran and academic area is centered around 2 historical moments. And one is the Unveiling Act of Reza Shah in 1936 that banned wearing the veil in public. And the other one is the Veiling Act and the compulsory hijab of Islamic Republic that was made mandatory by Khomeini in 1983. So while both at the essence of veiling and unveiling, they targeted female autonomy over her body, their effects were very different, and both in terms of magnitude and severity. And it's often they have been compared with one another, and it's been argued that making hijab compulsory was brought some women had some positive effect on women who had hijab, and I disagree with that, because when we look at hijab outside of the frame of Islam and understand how it's contributed to women's oppression, then that's such a small part in defining women's role in the society, bringing Islamic women out to the public. That's what. So with Reza Shah Unveiling Act was part of the modernization project and also the creation of modern nation state. As we know, and feminist scholars have very extensively theorized, the modern nation state at its core is heteronormative, and it was made possible by heteronormativity. And heteronormativity, just to briefly explain the meaning, is it's a cultural, legal, and institutional practice that maintain the heteronormative assumptions that there are only two genders, and these genders reflect the biological sex, and only sexual relationship between these two are normal and acceptable. So, as we know, Iran, before the modern nation state, was not a heteronormative society. So how do we create heteronormativity, which is essential to the creation of a modern nation state, in a society that is not heteronormative? And the reason that heteronormativity becomes essential to the creation of modern nation state is how much modern nation state borrows from heteronormativity to create itself the idea of the nation, the idea of motherland, and its soldiers that are only becomes popular among population by how it uses what already exists especially in the Western society, as that the nation becomes the female body becomes a motherland, is linked to motherhood, and in relation to that, the soldier, because modern states and modern nation had to have modern military. That's one of the main components of the modern nation state. So in order to create the soldiers, also we need to, the state relies on heteronormativity and all the heteronormative tropes. So in Iran, what Reza Shah does is, first of all, it's more concerned, and Reza Shah was more concerned with the image of the nation, right? Like, how do we modernize the nation visually? And unveiling was not limited to women, as Wendy de Souza in her very interesting book, Unveiling Men, Modern Masculinities in 20th Century Iran, in 2019 published, talks about how unveiling influenced Iranian men. And the reason, and when you bring unveiling of men into the equation of unveiling women in Reza Shah era, then the modernizing or westernization of Iran as a nation is much more becomes dominant in understanding what, rather than women, and that still stands too. It's, of course, it's an attack on female autonomy, but also when we see what's happening with the men at the same time, then the main concern becomes that visual image of the nation, that's a westernized nation. Moving to Islamic Republic. So this modern, so in the past, since the birth of nation state, it doesn't matter, Reza Shah, Mohammad Reza Shah, and Islamic Republic, they're all trying to produce and reproduce heteronormativity in one way or another. And hijab is, of course, has been, during Pahlavi, there was different kinds of ways to create this binary, but also in Islamic Republic with hijab, it becomes much more the image of Iran as a heteronormative society where women are only assumed to be the subject of objects of sexual desire and being sexual being. It creates that binary, and it's important to also pay attention that in this creation of this visual heteronormative binary, then homosexuality finds a very comfortable space to be practiced, because masculinity of men is protected with this, with focusing on female body. So after the 1979 revolution, so also it's so that's when the systematic assault on females' autonomy over body starts with the creation of modern nation states. And before that, it's social and cultural norms that was shaped by class, and also climate and weather. That's very important in human history in determining what kind of attire people wore. That's what determined what people were. But when with 1979 revolution, well, hijab became the symbol of the Islamic revolution, and it created an Islamic image of Iran to the outside world. So there were laws that were added to Iranian constitution to legally force women to cover themselves, and if they were violated, and they were criminalized, right? So if they violated that law, they would be punished, and they would be they had to stand court. So if we come out of the framework of Islam and think that, okay, the hijab is merely about not only the creation of the Muslim woman, but also it's about morality. But we know that this has nothing to do with morality in Islam, because in every other sector of Iranian society, everything has become non-Islamic and immoral within the understanding of Islam morality, except for women's hijab and women's chador. Examples would be in economy sector, right? Interests and all aspects of Iran economy is now non-Islamic. Men who also are supposed to cover their body, now we see that how it's become their nudity has become normalized, and so on and so on. So this obsession with female body, then if we come outside of the Islam framework, so what is it? What is this obsession? How can we understand this obsession with female body? I see it as partly is that this is a project of creating a hegemonic masculinity. So it's not just heteronormativity, but in this world, like in the world order, and again, looking at the world order through gender lens, then hegemonic masculinity becomes an essential part of the world order. And how do we and if you think about, an example would be like Taliban kind of masculinity, right? Or that patriarchal masculinity that we all aware of. So what I see this as the way they have enforced hijab, especially during the Raisi in the past year, and also in the past 10 years, with Ahmadinejad, because Ahmadinejad also really emphasize a lot on this, on the hijab and hijab laws. So is a creation of this masculinity, hegemonic masculinity. And that happens with, first of all, hijab discourse, and not only the discourse, but also the attitude and the mechanisms of it, objectify female body. Women are female body is presented as just objects of desire with no subjectivity, and also just sexual, merely sexual, right? So there's no thoughts or character, or nothing is assumed, it's just merely as an object. It also normalized gender-based violence, right? It's as women, when the state subjects its citizens to harsh violence in public, then that's normalized, right? So and that if you look at the data that are coming out from Iran, the statistics for gender-based violence inside people's on individual interpersonal violence is also extremely increased. So creation of hegemonic forms of masculinity, that's essential for Iran, the Sepah and militarization. objectification of female body, and also normalization of gender-based violence. These are three major factors in as the consequences of hijab laws in Iran. The other thing is that women are the bad hijab women is seen as the symbol of West, and this connection between the bad hijab women and West was created around the revolution, and it was pretty much very much revitalized and reused throughout the past 40 years. So in a way, for Islamic Republic, hijab also has that, if bad hijabi women symbolize and represent the West, and if the Islamic Republic has invested all this money, all this energy for 40 years and has not been able to reinforce the hijab and make the Iranian women to be that in the shape and image that they want, what does that mean, right? So in a sense, it's also losing against the West and the cultural aspects of the West, even if so. But hijabi woman is also representing the West, and if we listen to all the discussions that are made within the sector that supports the states, we hear that these are all representative of West and the regime change and اغتشاشگر and all those. So it's not just, so hijab is not just about the covering body, and as we know also, another angle to this is Foucault points out the importance of sexuality in the creation of the modern nation again, right? Sexuality allowed the state to access individuals' body, and hijab, which is the cover of sexuality, right? Because the idea is the way it's justified is that women as sexual being, if they're not covered, then it's moral corruption. They arouse, they cause men to be sexually aroused. So this hijab, the hijab laws, gives the state unrestricted access to its citizens' body and justifies the day-to-day policing, restraining, and punishing them, right? And so let's say you're a woman in Iran. I wake up, today in the morning, you want to go just go about your life. And with my own experience is from the moment that you put, your hijab, you come outside in the public, you are already in this space of, you live in the space of death and life at the same time, simultaneously, and the stress of that, right? Because when you sit in a taxi, first of all, there's very possible that you're being subjected to sexual harassment. I've been there. I have so many experiences, more than I can count, of having been sexually assaulted in public, in taxis, and especially in taxis, right? And then the architectural, the way it's not just that there's a law that you have to follow, right? There is no law to follow. When Mahsa Amini, what she wore is a norm, is something that it's a norm. It's what everyone wear in Iran in terms of, for hijab. So there's no guarantee that, you never know what happens, if the unclear area of law, right? That's what really makes women vulnerable to this. And so you come out, you want to go have an interview, and so every building has a different law, right? So my hijab, if it's accepted in the streets, I can come out with a certain hijab. But if I'm going to go to a university building, if I'm going to go to a state building, if I want to go to court, each and every one of them have their own laws, and then you are policed. You go as a woman, you go inside a room, and you're someone check you from head to toe, and then you're allowed to go inside the building or not. So it's very nuanced. It's not just that there's this umbrella law, and as if you follow it, you're good. If you don't follow it, you're not. It's every moment you are the state can really violate your privacy and your autonomy. And do I have time or almost?
Yeah, do you have a few more points or should
Yeah, I just want to point out that again, because I'm interested, I study masculinity and I'm really and I think that's, you know, I see it as a source of so many of our issues. One thing that has happened is that hijab and how, okay, so I go back to me in Iran going outside of it. Then let's say, you know, I have an interview, right? I want to go, there is an important life event that I want to attend. These laws, like I might get arrested in the streets. I might go in the, you know, and I might not make it on time because, you know, I was stopped in this building being checked. And so just think about the opportunities that women have lost, right? Think about how much it costs, how much as women we have to pay extra for the hijab, right? And that extra burden on the family is under this economic burdens. And that's in addition to whenever you're arrested for your hijab, there's also a monetary penalty, right? And how this created a gender divide between men and women in Iran, where men as a class constantly every day, as women were oppressed, men were being privileged, and they got what, and with minimalizing women's access to public, men got the upper hand, right? So, and that's one of the, that also crucial to why Islamic Republic has been, despite all this mismanagement and corruption, has lived so long, because men have, in a way, you know, it benefited half of the population, and at the other half lost. So one question that comes in everyone's mind, and we keep talking about it with my friends and family, is that if this is the end of Islamic Republic, I mean, of course, we can't predict the future, right? But just thinking about this question, I invite you to consider these factors. First of all, and I call this a revolution because people are asking for structural change, and even if it doesn't change the structure at this time, it still changed the visual of the country, right? Like that, the images that we see coming out of Iran, it's already revolutionary, right? And what we see today, although it's in continuation of 2009 Green Movement, 4 years ago, labor protests, this is, I see it different, because this is where our 40 years of resistance, everyday resistance, has turned to a revolution, right? It has a history. We have a history of resisting this policies every day. We've practiced this, right? So so this is not, so we have the history, we have the practice, we've practiced it, and this is, and that makes it very much more powerful than every other protest and uprising that we've seen in this. And I'm going to end it with, if hijab is not part of the Islamic Republic, and with everything that I said, and how it's the role it plays with hijab, then what is Islamic Republic without hijab, right? Okay, Anashir, thank you so much.
Thank you. I have so many thoughts about what you just said, but I'm going to give it to Dr. Shams because I want to save time for important questions as well. Dr. Shams.
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Yaghoobi, and also to Julie Maxwell for putting this panel together. And thank you, Dr. Momeni, for this enlightening thoughts. And thanks to everyone for being here. These are very rough and difficult days for all of us. So I would like to apologize in advance if my thoughts are a bit scattered. I've been, very, very busy and overwhelmed in the past few days. I would just like to start with saying a couple of words in response to Dr. Yaghoobi's first question, and to follow up on Dr. Momeni's sort of very comprehensive view of the contemporary sort of modern period, and take you a little bit further back in history, and give you a bit of literary overview, and perhaps show you that this hegemonic masculinity and patriarchal masculinity that Dr. Momeni referred to is something that, if you want to look beyond the framework of the Islam, we can actually find it very much deeply rooted in different layers of the society. And my focus will be on sort of the literature, the literary aspect, without wanting to go too much into details because we don't have time. This is really just more like an informative session to open up, hopefully, discussions for perhaps future panels. So I would like to just mention a couple of words about the category of Persian woman poet. This is something that this past couple of days, you probably have heard the name of Tahireh Qurratul Ain. You probably have heard the name of Fouqa Farrokhzad in the context of, defying gender roles, and in the case of Tahireh Qurratul Ain in particular, being a religious leader of the Babi Baha'i religious minority, and also defying and renouncing publicly her hijab, led to her execution that happened in secret. And if you go back in history, perhaps to the very, very beginning, in fact, of the inception of Persian poetry, what has remained with us to this day, the name of Rabi'eh bint Ka'b probably is very familiar to those of you who are poetry lovers and poetry readers. And perhaps you know that one of the main reasons that her name has remained to this day with us, this is, we have only around 55 stanzas that belong to her or attributed to her, have been attributed to her. But really what has kept her so fresh in our memory is the traumatic collective recollection of how she was killed in the hands of her brother Haris, who killed her, basically ordered the killing of her sister after finding out that she had an affair with the court slave of her brother called Haris. Without again wanting to go too much into details, I just want to bring to your attention that this story of, this problem really of controlling the feminine body, the woman's body, is something that is deeply rooted also in our literary tradition. We don't know much about Rabi'eh herself. We only know the way in which she has been framed by male authors who came after her, particularly Abu Sa'id Abul Khair, Attar Neyshaburi. Dr. Yaghoobi has written a wonderful book on Attar. Highly recommend reading that. And she addresses a lot of these actually questions in her book. And then after that, Dr. Jami, Abdurrahman Jami, and Reza Qoli Khan Hedayat also. So as you can see, Rabi'eh that we have today in our sort of memory, our collective literary memory, is a Rabi'eh that has been framed by multiple Persian male literati over time. And the way in which she has been framed is also very interesting. That is quite binary. On the one hand, you have literary historiographers who consider her as a boy chaser and sort of a mischievous player woman. On the other hand, you have, poets who were very much interested to frame her as a Sufi poet and a Sufi figure, mystic figure, that her love was just a metaphor for a much, more divine love. I think the case of Rabi'eh is a very good example, because we usually in the contemporary period, you know, and for good reasons, we are in love with Forough Farrokhzad. We know that she wrote, you know, really defiant and important poems that were turning points in the history of modern Persian literature in particular. Or Simine Behbahani is an important voice. And we heard about Tahireh Qurratul Ain, the 19th century figure, but we don't know much about a lot more female poets, women poets that we had in the past, and their names actually have not survived, which really brings me to the point about this, you know, highly masculine and male dominant realm of historiography. If you look at, you know, the way in which the history of Persian literature has been written, and I would go a little beyond that. I would say even the history of, you know, Iran, you know, we really live in a way in a golden age of, I think, producing scholarship by highly accomplished Iranian women and Persian-speaking women in general. And this hasn't been the case in the past. And, you know, the canons of producing knowledge and producing literature and producing, you know, literary texts have been very much in the male monopoly. So this is, you know, as Dr. Momeni mentioned, this has, I think we have to really go beyond Islam at this point, and we have to address this issue of, you know, institutionalized masculinity and historicized masculinity and patriarchy in a much more multifaceted way, in order to see that what we are dealing with, what we have been dealing with up to the past 3 weeks, I think, was a veiled society. And I think this veiled society has come to an end. It doesn't matter, and I agree with Dr. Momeni, I also consider this moment as a revolutionary passage in the history of Iran. And the reason for that is that I think the public appearance of the figure of the feminine body has changed. Even if they oppress everyone, kill everyone, put everyone in prison, and, you know, want to resume the social order the way it was 3 weeks ago, I think something in the collective memory of Iranian people have changed. They've seen things in the streets in the past 3 weeks that they will never forget, and it has become part of their collective psyche. And, you know, that's a revolution. I mean, that shows, I think, a fundamental change in the values and norms and aesthetics of a society that is important to be addressed. So I will stop there, because I know we have a lot of questions to address.
Thank you so much, both. That was a great introduction, and you both beautifully put everything in a context historically in terms of, you know, patriarchal institutions, the female body, and the literature that we have. Much of the literature you referenced, Dr. Shams, my students can resonate, because in both of my classes, we're reading both Jami, Attar, Forough, all of those. But I wanted to bring us to this moment that incited this revolution, which is not a revolution that we would traditionally understand or define as a revolution, but a new form, a feminist revolution, or a feminist social revolution. By asking you both to contextualize morality police and its inception under the Islamic Republic for those of the audiences who don't know much about Iran and that kind of, you know, police institution or official institution. And also, I want you to comment on Mahsa Jina Amini's background as a Kurdish Iranian, as a member of a marginalized member of Iranian fabric, but also like the way that the news has been portrayed, the news media or social media. Are we doing this service in this minoritized group, or are we, you know, aligning with our allyship with the Kurdish community, for example, today, I know that we had this huge massacre in Zahedan, for example, on Friday, and we don't hear much about that, or in Sistan and Baluchistan. Is this still, are we considering the marginalized members of the society, or are we again going with the mainstream and normative narratives that we've had with the majority? Also in terms of women's rights movements, because we are not referencing the Kurdish women's movement and their, activism. So maybe you can comment a little bit on this moment. We can start with Dr. Shams maybe this time.
Sure. I mean, I'm going to give a very brief sort of history of how these hijab patrols that we have today came about. And I use the term hijab patrol instead of morality police because, I know that this term now is a familiar reference term to what we call in Persian gasht irshad, but I think guidance patrol is probably a better translation because it sort of gives that connotation of these vans that are constantly stroll around the city and hunt basically people. They're on a hunt. The morality police, I think it gives a sense of an ethical morality, ethical or moral authority to the police that is completely absent in the case of these hijab patrols and guidance patrols. So just for those of you who are not familiar with this concept or this phenomenon, because I know it's very difficult to understand it for those of you who don't live in Iran or don't know Iran enough. After the 1979 revolution, shortly after, in fact, fairly shortly after the revolution, hijab became a compulsory dress code for Iranian women. And what is hijab? We are not talking about the sort of the veil that covers the face. We're talking about the scarf, the headscarf that covers the head and the hairs all together, and also a loose sort of covering that we call manteau in Persian, that you will wear usually on your shirt and on your pants. This became, and it has, the aesthetics of it has changed. We're not getting into that, but right after the revolution, the bill was passed very quickly. A lot of liberal and Republican and so-called Democrat revolutionaries who were pro-women's rights didn't really care about it the moment that it was passed, because they thought that there are much more important revolutionary goals to be worried about than to worry about a piece of cloth on the woman's hair, and which fueled this campaign of controlling women's body after the revolution. So the very first appearances of these patrols we have during the 1980s that came in sort of they organized themselves through committees and revolutionary grassroots institutions, and they called themselves Jundullah patrols, Sarullah patrols. And then during the Iran-Iraq war, we have the establishment of the Basiji militia and also the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. That is today one of the most giant military forces in the Middle East, in fact. So at the moment of the establishment of the Basiji militia groups and also the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, they institutionalized and had a lot of branches. And one of the sort of duties that they defined for themselves was to what they called a plan for the promotion of social modesty and security. So it was part of their revolutionary duty to go around the cities, to go to public spaces, to look out and see who, when the opposite sexes were talking to each other or socializing, to go and ask, what is your relationship to each other? And if a woman wasn't minding her hijab, they would allow themselves to go and kind of, advise them or warn them that they have to dress more modestly. And then during so this is during the 1980s, and it was a very, when we are talking about 1980s, this is perhaps the most oppressive decades after the revolution because of the war, because of the mass execution of the political prisoners, and because of these spontaneous revolutionary forces who would go on in the streets, sometimes scratch women's faces who weren't, wearing hijab properly, and or even throw acid on their faces. So, and nobody was taking responsibility for that because they weren't exactly institutionalized. So what happened after the war, this is during 1990s when Hashemi Rafsanjani was the president, he decided to give this more of an institutional shape so that a particular organization would be responsible for just looking and controlling women's hijab. And during that period, there was this comprehensive plan for the enforcement of modesty and chastity, or Tarh Jame Efaf, that was put forward. And then by the time that the religious reformists came to power, Mohammad Khatami became Iran's president for he took office for two rounds. And then in the very final days, and I think this is the mind-boggling part about the hijab politics of the Islamic Republic, is that Mohammad Khatami was the liberal face of this, this regime. And, many argue that, when he came, a lot of us actually, those who were like the first voters, voted for him in the hope of having a better life, a more free life. And it really boggles the mind when you think about the fact that it was during the very final days of Khatami's presidency in 2005, when Gasht Irshad, in the way that we have it today, or the hijab patrols in the shape that we have it today, as a resolution was sent to the parliament and it was passed. The bill was passed. Ahmadinejad took office in August 2005. And then after that, the moment that he got office, it was that the plan was executed. But something that changed over years was that at the beginning, usually they were mostly concerned with the social security, making sure that people are not getting pickpocketed or women are not being harassed. But as we move forward, we see that especially towards the end of Ahmadinejad's, and again during Rouhani's presidency, who again was like sort of a so-called moderate face of the regime, right? During Rouhani, you see that this becomes much worse. And Revolutionary Guard actually takes full autonomy and full power control over these entities, and then during Raisi, as Dr. Momeni mentioned, this new enforcement of the new laws for chastity, which was enforced in July this year, is really the maximum pressure that we see since basically 1990s. The official establishment of the hijab patrols. So this is like a whole new level of oppression and control of women's body. And the case of Sepide Rashno, as those of you who have been following the news, and her forced confessions, that in my view was really the main trigger for what we are seeing today. And on top of all of socio-political grievances, the Kurdish cause and all of that. But I think that event, it was actually happened right after the enforcement of the new set of restrictions proposed by Raisi's government. So I hope that gives you an idea about, hijab patrols, how they came about, what was their role. And one thing that I wanted to add, I think is really, really important, is that my concern right now is that, and this is the first time I'm sharing this in public, is that if this movement, this revolutionary movement, achieves its first and foremost goal, which is abolition of compulsory hijab, and women will be able to go to streets, or meaning that they don't stop pushing against this law, right? They wouldn't stop, and they would just continue being defiant, doing the civil disobedience, going to the streets without hijab. My concern is that these revolutionary forces would then, and then the government basically gets rid of or removes the hijab patrols. We won't see them in the streets. I think what we will have to be worried about, which brings us to the more important point, that we have a problem with the entirety of this government, not just the hijab at this point, is that these revolutionary forces are not going anywhere. We may very well go back to the 1980s with scratching women's faces, with acid throwing on women's faces, even if there is no institution to actually support them. So that's something to think about, I think, for us, for the women academics, for feminists, for all of those who are worried about the future of this movement. Is that what are we going to do, even if we succeed? And there is still, I think, going back to that notion of institutionalized misogyny and deeply rooted patriarchy in the culture, is that women are still going to be at risk, and women are still going to be a target of these kind of attacks. So that's something that we need NGOs, we need institutions in order to protect young women against these kind of threats that might very well exist, even if the compulsory hijab is abolished. I will leave the second question to Dr. Momeni to address.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shams. Just for the audiences, all three of us, women sitting here, have lived through those 1980s. Our childhood has been stolen, and we have all dealt with this morality, or whatever patrol we call it, and we have all felt it on our skins. So it is very personal, but it is also very scholarly, academic, and political for us. So, Dr. Momeni, can you unmute yourself?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Shams. I also wanted to emphasize on this point that Dr. Shams raised when I was talking to her yesterday, and the importance that let's not use morality police, because this is not about morality and how misleading that is. And I think it's much more, it's more fitting if we use hijab patrol instead of morality police. So the question is about how, what is the role of Mahsa ethnicity, Mahsa Amini's ethnicity in both in terms of the uprising, what's happening, and also how, what does it mean for the movement? Based on my lived experiences, the minorities in Iran, ethnic minorities, are they're suffering from institutional and structural oppression. But when my experience living is that with people, when you live in everyday life, the ethnic difference does not necessarily play a role. It's that when it comes to the state building, the nation building, again, the problem with Kurds is all about nation building, and it's very much also is embedded in the imperialism history and colonial history, and the borders, the issue of borders. So I don't know if it matters that Jina or Mahsa was a Kurdish woman or not. I don't know if her ethnic background mattered much. I think what makes her made her such an icon and a representative of this movement is how she represented an Iranian woman in a way that we all can relate to, right? That Mahsa could be my sister, your cousin, your but I think the fact that she's from a Kurdish background creates for us, especially in academia, or if we're talking with different news agencies, it has this potential of also talking about other the history of imperialism, and also how it works with the local states, right? Because they both benefit from these kind of projects. But what Mahsa also brings to this movement and her Kurdish background is how we are connected, how this movement is a transnational movement. Going back to just borrowing this beautiful slogan, Zan Zendagi Azadi, women, Jan Jian Azadi, which comes from, I always I end my gender in Middle East classes with Rojava and the movement and the Rojava movement, and how it's the most radical feminist movement, and not only in history, that we can now witness in human history, that's based on feminism and ecology, and also in terms of, and it's also moving outside of the nation building and the nation state political system, that as I was pointing out, how problematic it's been, and how and so in Rojava, what we witness is that the understanding, and it's just so I get goosebumps every time I think about it, is like how that we won't be able to have freedom if there's no, if we're not building our system, political system, based on feminism, and also the importance of ecology, right? Understanding that is just so progressive and so important. And now that we get that, and I hope that just doesn't stay a slogan, and we really, the public understand what's behind this slogan. But it also shows our connection in the Middle East, the women's connection in Middle East. And also, I think it shows that how something is happening in Middle East that's not just in Iran, right? It's not that this movement in Iran is not an isolated movement. It just happened, and what we see is very much connected in Kurdistan. And that is I think is because I always wondered why everything that has happened, whatever happens in every movement, every political movement in the Middle East, is so obsessed with women, is so obsessed with women's body. What's wrong? And then if we look at a different direction, then I think what prevails is that, well, it's been a very long project of oppressing women and creating that the heteronormative society. And the fact that there's constant gender tension in the Middle East is testament to women not being oppressed. They haven't been able to oppress us. That's why there's constantly a tension, right? There's always resistance. And so I think it's just the project of the creation of an oppressed Middle Eastern woman that is both supported in the West and by local government in Iran is just, it's failed. It's a failed project.
Thank you so much. I want to start with the Q&A, but I want to end on one of my most important questions, that is, what are we expecting Western news media, academics, universities, feminists who have been absolutely silent to do? And this is, I know all three of us are connected with women fighting on the ground in Iran, and this is what we are hearing from them. What do they want us as academics to do here?
Well, I mean, just today, I don't know about you guys, but I received multiple emails from students and professors who are just terrified from Iran, and just basically pleading for help and asking for support. They really expect all academic colleagues outside the country to raise their voice at this point, especially after what happened with Sharif University yesterday, which I think is just an entirely new and unprecedented level of violence on campuses, university campuses, students and professors. And so I think it's upon all of us. I know that there is a huge campaign going on right now at Penn. We are trying to get a letter, the president to actually, issue a letter, and we're hoping that that happens in the next few days. I think that there are a couple of other statements going around collecting signatures. Statements of different associations. So that's the least we can do, I think, to keep up the voice and to keep up the resistance. Right now, we know that because of the level of violence in the streets and because of the number of those who lost their lives in the most horrific way. And, Dr. Yaghoobi, you mentioned at the beginning the life of the Baluchis and Kurds. Are we going again towards the same direction? Are we going to close our eyes on this, vicious killing, mass killing of the Baluchis that is happening right now as we speak under the internet blockade? This is something that I think it's upon us as academics to address, because partly the Western media, I think, is trying to depict the story that some of them are trying their best, but there is a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of gap in the knowledge, a lot of gap in the historical knowledge, also the complexities of this issue of ethnic discrimination and ethnic minorities in Iran that is entirely neglected and misunderstood. And unfortunately, some of them are fueling the same separatist discourse that the Islamic Republic has been putting forward and executing towards against these ethnic minorities over the past 44 years. It's just mind-boggling how the Western media and the oppressive regimes sometimes just collaborate hand in hand. And I think this is our moment as academics to come in, step in, and complicate this binary narrative. And so that's one thing that I just wanted to urge all academic colleagues, wherever you are, it doesn't have to be complicated. At this point, I think it's really important that every university campus just releases a statement. I think that will increase the international pressure campaign, just to, as academics, to step in and show the true face of this violence, and and what's happening to the ethnic minorities, at the same time to the queer community. I think that there are two queer women on the death row. Let's not forget about them. I mean, their name is forgotten, right? In the middle of this revolutionary fury that we are dealing with at the moment. But there are so many gay, lesbians, transgender people, non-binaries inside Iran that are constantly, living under threat on a daily basis for so many years, and their fear has been normalized. And I think this is the moment for us to start, talking about these many different angles. And it's upon all of us, because it's such a, I think, difficult and complicated and energy consuming and time consuming task that it couldn't be done by one or two or three people. We have to organize, we have to mobilize at this point. And I think this is a really important moment in terms of mobilization. What do I have to say to the feminists in the West? I think, Iranian women had a chance back in 1979, 1980 to have a very successful and powerful transnational movement. And that was the anti-compulsory hijab march. That was an impressive, response to the sort of top-down legislation of veiling after the revolution. But one of the reasons that, the government was successful in suppressing those protests, in my view, it was twofold. One was the lack of technology and internet, which is extremely crucial in shaping the imagination and the mindset of this new generation that we see in the street, and they're getting killed, the 16 to 25-year-olds right now. And also the international, at the time, back in 1979, 1980, the absence of a well-united and organized international Iranian intellectual community in the West, which has happened as a result of the past 40 years of, forced and voluntary migration. Now we are, it's to our advantage that now we have such a rich community of intellectuals outside Iran. And I think this is the moment that I think with the presence of technology and with the presence of this wonderful and very capable international intellectual community, we can organize, we can mobilize, and it's upon us to let our feminist, Western feminist counterparts to know what's happening on the ground. And there were some, Judith Butler, for example, signed the statement, but it's not enough. It's like signing a statement is not enough. We know that. We need to mobilize marches. We need a lot of publicity at this point. So,
and the most recent marches that we had in 150 cities across the world,
it was
zero
impressive.
coverage on news media.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, one of the things that we can think about, right? It's amazing that in 2 days back to back, there were demonstrations across the world, international. I mean, we were talking about this with Dr. Momeni yesterday. But perhaps better planning in the future so that we can occupy the streets in a way that our presence would be covered and get much better coverage. There were back-to-back demonstrations, and I think that was perhaps might be one of the reasons that it didn't get enough international coverage. Something to think about in terms of organization in the future. At this point, I think this is a shared cause. There is a good question in the Q&A. Maybe we get into it in a minute, but I think the men's presence and their role is also extremely instrumental and important in this movement. It has been, and I think the notion of namus and ghayrat, we can see in the past 3 weeks, it has completely shifted. I'm not saying in every single Iranian household, I'm sure there are so many who still think the same way, but look at these men, like standing side by side, the women, and protecting them against the oppressive forces of the regime instead of telling them what to do with their body. They're telling the government to stop, telling our women what to do. They're calling Mahsa Amini their sister. So I think this is a moment of, unity also. This is not about either men or women. This is not about binary categorizations. This is a moment of convergence and unity, I think, in all senses.
May I also add that it's not just as you said, the binary men and women. I'm hearing from our queer folks that everyone is telling them, oh, it's not your time. And I'm trying to remind everyone that we heard this about the hijab in 1970s. Everyone said it's not time to talk about your hijab, and see where we are 44 years later. So let's stop this separatist, narrative and be united. It's everyone's time. Dr.
I like to add a comment to this. I think it's very important that scholars and feminists use this moment to not only speak to, because now the nation is listening, right? This is time that we talk about gender equality. This is time that we talk about gender sexual minorities, right? This is the time that over and over, the previous generation, when you talk about the previous generation that participated in 1979 revolution, when I study, I listen, and then I ask my parents, how did you even support it? You know, this empty, meaningless, and none of their slogans were, again, you know, empty. They never thought about what they want. What is I worked on the meaning of freedom. What do we mean by freedom? Are we ready for freedom, right? And I think one of our most important role is to use this space to talk about these topics with people, and help to in shaping and forming these meanings, or at least, you know, think about it together, make it part of the discussion. For non-Iranians, I think it would be very important, as we see there is not much coverage on major medias. It's important to be the voice of people in their social media, just share the news, and yeah, support the revolution that way. That would be great.
Let me just add very quickly, Dr. Yaghoobi, to what Dr. Momeni said. I think what she's saying is really important in terms of just comparing how we are acting right now compared to our parents, right? Our parent generation. Partly it's because, I mean, thanks to technology, as I said, if there wasn't Zoom, we couldn't have this session right now. It's as simple as that. You know, from Los Angeles to Philadelphia to Chapel Hill. So I think, you know, this is, and then as the revolutionary episode is unfolding, we are thinking about it. We are decoding we are very careful about the slogans. We are decoding them. We are trying to, you know, give them multiple meanings, that if you're saying Zan, we are not just talking about this binary notion. We are talking about that queer body as well. And you know, I know that there are collectives, for example, now being formed that they're using the woman with you know, with the X, so that the word actually is more inclusive, all inclusive. So and you know, these are really important, I think, developments, and the progress that we have made. And I think we should just keep up the good work at this point.
Thank you. We have one question here in the chat, but I would like to ask everyone to either raise their hands or post their questions in the chat. So following up from the involvement of men, to what extent has the movement moved beyond gender/morality patrol? So is it still just about gender and women and hijab, or the movement has gone beyond, or this revolutionary moment has gone beyond these concepts?
I mean, obviously it has gone beyond. I think everyone knows that. And I think the reason for that is that, as Dr. Momeni said at the very beginning, hijab has become, and this is not something that we are saying, this is something that they say, that, you know, hijab is one of the pillars of the Islamic Republic. Yes. And, you know, Khamenei came out today after 3 weeks and, you know, emphasized on that. Raisi gave an interview 2 days ago and emphasized on the values, that our values haven't changed. So you know, we are talking about the entirety of the system, of course, but I think, and this part is very important, is that we have to be very realistic, and we have to be, you know, careful about how we are jumping into conclusions at this point, because it's very, you know, at these moments, it's very easy to get emotional and become an idealist and say, you know what, this is something and we are going to achieve it. Okay, how? And I think one thing that shouldn't be lost in this revolutionary cause is that we are still fighting for against a gender apartheid regime. And our first and foremost goal is to abolish anti-woman laws. And, you know, that's not just, I think hijab is one of them, and it has to be the first and foremost goal. And, you know, a lot of people who started campaigning for Mahsa Amini from the first day and are constantly online, they're saying, let's not get, you know, lost in this, because we are all in, let's face it, we are all in the middle of a huge hurricane right now, literally and metaphorically, in the sense that there is, you know, this sense of, and all revolutions are like that. They come and they take you with them. And it's very easy to get lost and get drawn. And I think we shouldn't get lost in this moment. It's still abolishing compulsory hijab and abolishing anti-women laws should be our first goal. And then if the government is not accepting that, then they have to go. And we are fighting against that. And it doesn't seem like they're going to compromise. I mean, I haven't seen any sign of compromise in the past few days, at least.
Dr. Momeni.
Dr. Momeni, you want to add?
Well, Dr. Shams, I think you covered it pretty well. I also think I think it's very important to make sure that it goes beyond these current discussions, even, you know, when it comes to like beyond gender. I think we need to talk about gender equality, not just hijab. We need to, people should start thinking about what they mean by freedom. We should think about disability rights. When we think about freedom, it's part of it is being free to move in this, to be able to be in public spaces, to be able to have a job, to be able to be a member of a member of the society, and that extends to other minorities, sexual minorities, ethnic minorities, religious minorities. And I know historically there has been a lot of prejudice against from people against religious minorities, right? So we need to talk about these things, and the more we are inclusive, the more our freedom, the definition of freedom broadens, the more we become, because we include all other sectors of society, we include minorities, and we just become more powerful and bigger.
Yeah, and just very quickly, you know, I just want to put this out there. Like, I think, you know, that the Kurds, the Baluchis, and Baha'is. I mean, these are the three, and you know, the minorities in Khuzestan also. I mean, these areas are extremely, you know, have been discriminated against for the past 44 years. And I think their needs and their demands should also be in the forefront of this movement. This is a movement against all kinds of apartheid. It's not just gender apartheid. It started there. And I think one of the reasons that, you know, emancipatory women movements have a lot of potential to be on the forefront of the revolutionary movements and be successful is exactly this. Is because they are very much willing to open the cause and include all sorts of discrimination and make it a shared cause and a fight. And I think, and you know, that's that in this sense, we did not have a revolutionary moment like this, not just in Iran but also in the Middle East.
Thank you, Sarah Shaban.
Hi, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. So our university is holding a small panel just for in-house, just so that the faculty and students know more about what's going on, in the same way that we would talk about LGBTQ+ issues or Black Lives Matter, et cetera. And so show that this is also a movement that needs to be supported, and that, you know, there's a lot of nuances within that. And my question is, one of the things that we want to address is the issue of sanctions, right? And I know the New York Times came out with an article blaming the economy in Iran for what's happening now. And so if that question were to come up, how would you respond in that way?
I can answer that. I've thought about that. I was against sanctions. And sanctions had unrepairable consequences on people. It destroyed the middle class that we know how vital it is to the process of democracy. It made the poverty level. It's people now struggle to have food on their sofre, and just think about the kind of trauma that come with that, right? When the generations of Iranians that have gonna live with this trauma, right? And so it's so the consequences of it, and just cutting Iranians, Iranians from the world culturally, economically, and that's how Islamic Republic became Islamic Republic. Like, that's why they became so successful and powerful. And but then sanctions is in the past, right? Now, if the main purpose of sanction is to impoverish people to the point that they revolt and change the regime, right? Then, not that this is, I mean, economy and people struggle to make a life, just make a living is also, you know, of course, it's in the background of, or is a component of this movement. We can't really deny that. But then we are at this point, right? We are at this point that even if this is a result of the sanction, even if that was the goal of sanction, we're in the point that change is happening. So I think it's just talking about sanctions is not gonna, and now we want the sanctions that are gonna help, like, you know, the technology sanctions, those should be removed. They should have been removed, you know, a long time ago when it comes to medication, all that. But at this moment, I think talking about sanctions is just, I don't see how productive it is or how it's gonna help the movement.
I think
Yeah.
Canada has placed some sanctions on individual members affiliated with the regime, so that is probably different. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. I just wanted to say, like, Justin Trudeau just, you know, had an interview today and announced new sanctions on entities and individuals that are collaborating, directly collaborating with the government, and also the morality police or the hijab patrol. So I think those kind of focused sanctions, if that's the right term, I don't know what's the term that is used for it, that those sanctions that are not focusing on the population, on the medical, you know, needs of the people, because there are lots of, I agree with you that there's lots of patients in the have suffered over the past, you know, years as a result of the sanctions. One of them is my own family, for example. Certain medications are literally unavailable in the pharmacy's shelves as a result of the sanctions, and they're not available in the black market. You literally have to send them from outside the country. So these things are real. These economic grievances about sanctions, you know, causing, you know, destroying the middle class, making chicken and egg a luxury and completely unaffordable for people. All of this, there's no doubt that, you know, we are against that, and we think, I personally think that at this point we have come to a point where really all governments should cut their ties with the regime until the demands of the revolutionary protesters have met, because otherwise, even if they could, you know, the general strikes are successful in the country, which is very unlikely because people don't have any kind of protection, and if they know that the world doesn't care, it didn't care in 2009 when the government shut down the internet and killed 1,500 people. You know, the internet, the sanctions on technology continue to exist. I mean, the world should have come to a point of awareness back in 2019 to provide, you know, the Iranians with free access to internet, so that if the regime, you know, we have another oppressive episode, they can protect themselves by, you know, by at least being able to share what's happening to them. Didn't do that. So yes, those kind of sanctions should be lifted immediately. There have been some actions from Skype and from Signal in the past few days. Starlink, Elon Musk claimed that it's available, but I think it was the way that he framed it, it was really misleading. These devices should be, sent to Iran somehow. There have to be people on the ground that send these satellites to people, make it available on the ground so that people can access internet. But as far as, any sort of deal and exchanges at this point, I think whoever is talking about sanctions and putting the emphasis on the sanctions is betraying the Iranian people and those who are in the streets and those children. These are 16, 17 years old. So let's not forget that. These kids were born after 2000s. And this is just, it's unbearable. And whoever is moving the pin at this point somewhere else, I think we should be careful about their analysis, and we should, give it a second thought before sharing it with students, especially.
Sanctions as well as political military intervention.
Yes.
Yeah, that's all.
Too, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the change, and this is again really important, the change really has to come from within. It's historically speaking, 1953 coup, which basically destroyed any hope for democracy in Iran. It was a CIA, MI6 orchestrated coup, killed any hope for democracy and democratic society. And then, the 1979 revolution, as much as it was a socialist revolution, let's not forget, Khomeini was in Neufel-le-Château. And, he had no idea what's going on the ground. And, he was just giving this revolutionary promises that he never actually made. He didn't realize any of them. One of them was the women hijab and women's dress code. And when he was in the plane going back to Iran, he said, I have no feeling. And why should he? Because he wasn't even inside the country. People were getting killed in the street. So any hope of bringing someone from outside to the country or, military intervention is just doomed to fail. And I really invite all those people who are arguing against this to just take a look at the history of modern Iran and see, what's happening. One of the reasons that has become very difficult for the government in the past 3 weeks to kill the protests is basically the fact that it's a leaderless movement. They oppress people in Sistan, Balochistan, people in Kurdistan rise. They oppress Kurdistan, people in Yazd rise. Places that they have, they had no expectation, they're really taken by surprise. And the fact that we hear just the same repetitive rhetoric from Khamenei that these people are اغتشاشگر, they're rioters, I think it just says that he has also run out of words. He's just repeating himself. He said the exact same thing in the past 13 years multiple times. He doesn't have anything else to add.
Yeah, but his audience is not us. His audience is just that sector that supports.
Yeah,
the
revolutionary.
It's just none of
Yeah, they're بچه‌های ساواک.
Yeah.
Sawak affiliated kids, and the backed by US and the foreign interference. Yeah. All right. Did you want to say something, Dr. Momeni? Well, any final remarks before we leave?
I just wanted to say thank you so much. This was wonderful, and thank you for everyone who stayed with us until now. And let's keep up the fight. Let's not leave our people alone. I know it's tough, but
well, on our campus, we are going to have a teaching session next week. So yeah, in person.
I also want to thank everyone, and thank you, Dr. Yaghoobi and Julie, once again. And I just want to say that I think for all of us who has experienced previous uprisings, whether in Iran or here, this is such a traumatizing moment, but also filled with hope. And And I'm hopeful, and I think it's justice if this regime come down with women and hijab specifically, of how much we suffered for hijab and how much what a high price we paid for it.
Thank you so much to Dr. Shams and Dr. Momeni. Thank you to everyone for being here tonight with us. This was a very productive and great conversation. We hope to continue this conversation. Thank you, dear Julie, for helping me, and have a great night, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Yaghoobi. خسته نباشید. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.